Hi guys, here we are again with Orville episode 4. Right, once again, as I think I've started with every one of my reviews, I enjoyed this episode. Again, a very good episode, slightly different reasons. Maybe didn't have quite the sort of overriding, maybe lesson in the episode quite the same way as the previous two did, but still a very good episode, and much more so, very much a Star Trek or even general sci-fi episode. I mean, it reminded me of some Stargate episodes, certainly some Next Generation episodes, some Voyager episodes, sort of old school sci-fi, very Star Trekky, and it's funny. I know obviously a lot of people, when they did their reviews for Orville, were doing it whilst Star Trek Discovery was ongoing. I've obviously watched the whole of Star Trek Discovery and have enjoyed it mostly until the very end. And if you haven't seen my review or know what happens at the end, I won't spoil it, but I wasn't particularly happy about the end of Star Trek Discovery. And so in terms of that sort of comparison thing, the Orville for me is, I mean, I've only 4 episodes in, but I think I'm going to find myself enjoying this more than I did in terms of Discovery. Which is strange in a way, considering Star Trek Discovery is Star Trek, whereas obviously Orville isn't Star Trek, but they seem to have managed to capture that much better, even though obviously you do have quite a lot of tongue-in-cheek and comedy in it, which something Star Trek touched on at points, but nothing to the extent that we're talking about people's dicks, or as in the next episode, because I've watched that too, legs getting sawn off and things like that. That's not in Star Trek, but that doesn't seem to affect Orville. It doesn't seem to make it feel any less. It's very well done, and it just shows, if you've got got a bit of money behind you and a bit of influence, such as Seth MacFarlane does, then you can push a project like this along. And there's something like this should have been made years ago, quite frankly, because there was a void. All of a sudden, we've got lots of sci-fi. I mean, I've said this before, but there's even more. Just keep coming and coming. It's brilliant. Seems to be in a bit of a boom period with sci-fi at the moment, and that is really, really good. So getting into the episode itself, obviously the main premise of what happens is the Orville crew come across an absolutely massive ship. And that first bit when you see the Orville ship sort of just in front of it, so you don't see the full scale of it, I was kind of thinking, oh, come on, something Borgy. I've said this in my Star Trek Discovery reviews as well. I bloody love the Borg. I know obviously the Orville isn't Star Trek and doesn't necessarily have the Borg, but if they want to have something like the Borg in there, I'd have no complaints at all, and I wouldn't care if they completely ripped it off. I think the Borg are a great concept. But so yeah, I was quite excited by that. I mean, as it turns out, obviously they weren't the Borg, but still pretty cool sort of premise of what happens here. The ship is massive. They reference it to being about the size of New York City. To be fair, I'm not sure if they're referring to New York City as of now or New York City as of then, which I imagine would be a bigger city. So probably bigger than this New York City that you'd be thinking of. That might be me overthinking that. But once they get on board this ship, once they get through a few doors and we see Alana open up, when we've seen this a few times where she gets asked to sort of show her strength, very sort of traditional sort of Spock, Data, doing that whole strength thing, and I like that. Again, it's a good reference to Star Trek and everything like that. We see it in other sci-fi programs as well, but it does again make it feel quite Star Trekky. And on that note, we've seen it a bit in this, and we do see it in the next episode as well. Isaac sort of obviously learning about humanity and stuff, very much Data, and to an extent again the Vulcan characters of the past, where they don't quite understand human beings, and so he's learning different things. One of which is, although I think he doesn't really quite learn the message properly, about male genitalia and how we call people dicks, and he interprets it as a compliment because of what he was explained. And to be fair, if you did live from a completely other society and had nothing to do with humans before, it probably would be quite a confusing concept, the way we refer to genitalia both in positive and negative constantly, even potentially within the same conversation. So yeah, quite funny, quite a few funny jokes in terms of the whole dick thing went through the whole thing. And again, this episode, as I sort of said before, did have quite a few jokes. Nothing that sort of made me laugh out loud, but a variety of them worked pretty well. So going off from that tangent, obviously the guys are on board the ship, and they eventually discover the sort of inner sanctum. I mean, it's the main part of the ship, but there's still a fair bit of the ship that wasn't part of this. And what's in there is basically a world as far as they can see, and we've got fields and sort of rolling green hills, and it all seems sort of fairly peaceful. So they start searching around the place to see what happens, and the captain, Isaac, and the doctor come across a shack. So they knock on the door, and they answer, then shut straight away. Then they open again and start shooting at them, and Isaac shoots the man who was shooting at them, which brings on another quite good joke about once the captain gets in there and starts speaking to the son and the mother, explaining to them that they've only stunned their father, then just checks, you did just stun him, and he said yeah, of course. And so yeah, we've just stunned the father. And there's another little joke to that as well a little bit later on. Again, good jokes. The pacing of it works well. I had my reservations. If you watched episode 1, I had my reservations about Seth MacFarlane being in this and the whole kind of Family Guy humour and stuff. on the whole, it hasn't really been a problem. There's a few misses. Certainly a banana joke in the first episode, I felt that was very much Seth MacFarlane. It didn't really work for me. And to be honest, I'm still not blown away with the whole ex-wife thing, and anything sort of to do with that isn't really working for me. But it doesn't matter because everything else is so good. So with them discovering this shack, they learn from these two people that they think this is their world in essence. And they are completely blissfully unaware that they're on board this ship. And the reason our guys have gone on board this ship, if you haven't seen the episode, is because the ship is cruising slowly towards a star, and so in about 6 months will be incinerated. So they're basically trying to do something to get it off that course to avoid, as they found the people on there, being burnt to death, which is understandable. But obviously these people have no idea about this, and that seems obviously rather unusual. And as we later discover, there's a whole society there basically worship the words of Tyrol, who's some sort of great writer or former leader or god of some description. And Hammerlack is kind of the guy of today who's in charge of everything and pushes forward this sort of religious agenda. But as we discover, certain people are deemed as reformists and they don't believe everything they're being told, and there might be more to this world than just what they see. But it's sort of kind of Matrix style in the sense that you don't believe the world you're in. I've dug 30 feet beneath my garden so far. I haven't found any bulkheads, so I'm pretty sure I'm not on board a ship. But you need to check these things. And as the episode progresses, basically the premise of what happens is that we start to learn that this Hammerlack guy kind of knows that there's more going on than just this world they see. I don't think he necessarily knows the whole ship thing, but he knows there's more going on. And he's basically sort of trying to stop that, because in essence it seems to be that he just wants to hold on to power. And so he uses this sort of religious scriptures and stuff as a way to keep himself in power and keeping the sort of population to an extent fearful but also loyal. And we see this in the form of something outside what seemed like a town hall or whatever in the sort of the main town or city in this sort of dome that they're living in. Where he incites, to an extent, a sort of rioting crowd to beat, from what I understand, the way the commander referenced it, beat a man to death for spreading literature and teachings contrary to Tyrell's teachings. It's very much a sort of religious or something of those nature-driven society by this Hammerlack man who's sort of manipulating things. But he doesn't want to believe at all that the ship is going to be crashing into a star. However, that doesn't really matter because our crew get round that and instead sort of go with the reformists and come across the bridge of the ship through some sort of hatch, which one of the reformists living there had obviously discovered previously, and then showed the captain and the rest of the guys there this. And once the guys go through this hatch, we have a slightly comical lift scene, which didn't really work for me actually. That was maybe a bit of an example of sort of Seth MacFarlane joke, which doesn't really quite hit home for me. But like I say, I'm being picky there. They eventually discover the bridge of this ship and find a video of the former captain, who happens to be Tyrell, the person that they all worship. And that is Liam Neeson, which brings me on to something else that I've noticed with Orville, which is a surprise to me. Some of these guest actors that are popping up, again in the next episode we see this too, are way more high profile than I thought Orville would have done. Again, it sort of shows, if you've got a bit of influence and know some people in the industry, it certainly helps. Because beyond that, there's also other people that are recognisable faces that are playing sort of bit part, sort of extra characters in these episodes. Once they'd obviously finished hearing the message that Liam Neeson got to deliver, which was basically explaining what had happened, which is the ship had been sent off to find other planets or find other locations, but they realised that they wouldn't be able to get anywhere in the space of one generation, so they built this massive ship to last 3 generations, and the 3rd generation would be the one that eventually got there. But unfortunately, during this trip, they hit an ion storm, and that messed up their engines and basically meant they were just sort of stranded floating in space, and so in essence decided to live on board the ship instead because it had all of these resources available and pretty much was self-sustainable, and generation after generation has gone on to the extent they've actually forgotten what their origins were. So that concept of the episode and everything was quite interesting, and it's something that could be sort of is to an extent being done with other things in the past. It's a story series potentially in itself. So yeah, that was good. The one little moan I'll have, and this is just me being very picky, is they then go and decide to open what is kind of the sunroof, which was the sky. So everybody living in this world on the ship who doesn't know this is all going on suddenly watches the sky change completely into blackness with little dots on, is what they're seeing. wouldn't a lot of those people freak out massively at that? They didn't all know that these guys were on the bridge and this was about to happen. I would have thought there'd be people thinking the end of the world has come and all sorts of strange things will start happening. Bearing in mind, we took into the account the culture of BOTAS and everything with the whole male versus female child thing. It does seem a little bit weird to then sort of ignore society and stuff there and the sort of impact that something like that might happen. Like I say, this is me being really picky, but when they did open that sunroof, I did think, that's maybe a little bit alarming. Wouldn't it be better to sort of break the news to people first and then demonstrate it, as opposed to just going, balls out straight away? But they did, and it seemed to work all right, and everybody was sort of, to an extent, from what we saw, happily ever after. So in conclusion, like I say, I enjoyed this episode. I've enjoyed all the episodes I've watched so far. I'm pretty confident I'm going to enjoy the rest. Again, quite a few good jokes. I didn't sort of mention the helmsman guys. Again, several good jokes, especially, and I didn't mention any of this, but the Orville got called off to a distress signal while the captain and the other crew members he was with were on board this ship. So they had to go and rescue a colony ship. And when that battle was happening, it was quite funny, because when Lamar actually sort of blew up the ship, he jumped up and goes, boom, yeah, how did I that? Or something along those lines, and got really overexcited. Now, BOTAS sort of told him to calm down, to which he sort of did, sat back down, but he still did a little boom. That was really good. But yeah, as with every episode I've seen so far, the helmsman guys, both of them have some great lines. They've had some pretty good lines the whole way through. Sometimes one-liners, sometimes a little bit more thought out, but they are usually pretty entertaining. And what goes on in the next episode with the whole practical jokes thing very much plays on that. So in terms of a final score, I don't think this particular episode necessarily stood out particularly any better than the previous three. So I'll give episode 4 a 7 out of 10.